long before the first conquistador set his foot on the dripping leaves of the jungle, long before any border was carved into the map, there were voices in the canopy, voices that did not speak from the ground, but from the sky. The people of the treetops, hunters and whisperers of wind, lived where no empire dared to rise. They were not ruled by kings, but by omens. They built no cities, yet their watchtowers swayed with the clouds. Their laws were carved in feathers, and their gods did not walk, they flew. They are known now by a name whispered through forgotten scrolls and fading missionary journals, the Sky Killers, a tribe not remembered for who they were, but for what they did one cursed night. But before that night, they were simply the ones above. Far in the dense rainforests of what is now northeastern Peru, above the rivers that fed the Amazon's bleeding heart, a network of wooden bridges once linked colossal trees, cebas, strangler figs, kapok giants, in a living city suspended above the earth. This was Canopy, the sacred canopy of the upper tribes. From below, it was invisible. From above, unreachable. It was here that the Sky Killers were born, not as warriors, but as watchers. The ancestors of the Sky Killers belonged to the Chain and Yin lineages, peaceful forest tribes whose lives were spent among vines and silence. They farmed in treetop gardens, using baskets of soil carried upward by ropes and pulleys. Children learned to walk not on dirt, but on bark. Women gave birth in leaf-woven hammocks, swaying in the wind. Even their dead were buried in the branches, cradled in woven nests, high above jaguars and decay. But peace in the jungle never lasts long. One moonless season, the canopy began to change. Birds stopped returning to their nests. Wind no longer sang through the branches. And one by one, sentries posted at the bridge outposts vanished. No blood, no tracks, just a fall, or perhaps a taking. Some said it was the sky serpent, who came to collect old debts. Others blamed the Warani, fierce tree hunters from the west. But the elders, who watched the leaves and listened to the roots, said something older had awakened. And then came the night, a night not written in ink, but burned into bark and bone. It began with the sound of wings. Not birds, not bats, something heavier, something angry. By dawn, Canopy would no longer exist. They say it began with a shadow, not the kind cast by sun or moon, but the kind that moved against them, flickering across the canopy with no source, silent as mist, sharp as obsidian. A young watchkeeper named Iru was the first to see it. Perched in the upper branch outpost, he was staring into the hollow dark when the shadow passed overhead. No sound, no scent, just a rush of cold wind and a feeling in the bones, as if the forest had held its breath. That night, Iru vanished. They found his bridge rope cleanly sliced, not frayed, not snapped, as if something with precision had cut it mid-air. There was nobody there, only his feathered earring caught on a branch 20 feet below. The elders summoned the wind callers. These were not shamans in the way the lowland tribes knew them. They didn't chant or drink. They listened, to leaves, to wind patterns, to the warnings of birds. And what they heard, none dared speak aloud. But one word made it through the silence. Karakar, a name so old, it belonged to the roots of language itself. It meant that which hunts from above. The Sky Killers did not yet exist, but their birth would come in blood and fire. The next few days were filled with quiet panic. Families tied their children to sleep hammocks so they wouldn't vanish in the night. Warriors, once hunters of monkeys and birds, began sharpening their spears for something they could not name. Nets were strung between trees. Smoke signals were lit at dusk and dawn, but the far watchpoints stopped replying. One after another, Canopy was becoming blind. Then came the burning. It was the eastern tree, a giant kapok called Mother Branch, the oldest tree in the network, that burst into flames without lightning or storm. Witnesses swore they saw something strike it from above, streaking red and hissing like steam. Others claimed it was no weapon, that Mother Branch simply ignited from within, as if consumed by rage. The fire didn't spread down, but upward, against nature, against wind. The sky itself seemed to shudder. What few survived the collapse spoke of shapes descending through the smoke. Not animals, not men. Things with long limbs and stretched wings. Painted skin. Faces covered in bone masks. Some believed it was a rival tribe, the Yumara, long thought extinct. Others whispered the forbidden, that it was the ancestors themselves, returned in wrath. The people of Canopy had only one choice. From the ashes of Mother Branch, they would become what the forest needed, not prey, but predators. They would strike from above. They would become the watchers who kill. They would take the name the trees had whispered in fear and own it. Thus were born the Sky Killers. At dawn, smoke still curled from the blackened corpse of Mother Branch, twisting into spirals the wind refused to carry. Canopy no longer had a heart. Its sacred center was a hollow pit of glowing embers and splintered wood. The elders gathered in the tree of mourning, a smaller but ancient fig known for its silence. Not even birds perched there anymore. Something had changed in the jungle's breath. For the first time in generations, the people held a Kaltena, the rite of the dead sky. It was not a ceremony for mourning, but for transforming. Children were hidden in root hollows. The tree wives and elders painted the faces of warriors with ash from Mother Branch. The pigment was sacred. It was believed to blind the spirits of death. Then came the bones. Sky burials had always been peaceful. The dead were wrapped in vines and placed in high-woven nests among the upper limbs, their souls believed to travel with the wind. But when the warriors climbed to the ancestral platforms to retrieve sacred relics for the rite, they found the nests torn open. Bodies were missing. The older corpses, those buried for years, had been taken. Not scattered, not devoured by birds or beasts, but removed. Only the ropes and wrappings remained, and one thing more. Deep claw marks in the bark, shaped not like those of monkeys, cats, or eagles. Long, curved, and unmistakably deliberate, tools or talents. It was then the Sky Killers understood. Whatever haunted the forest had no interest in gold or land. It was taking the dead, and something had to be returned. Led by the war pair Aiken and Tella, twin siblings raised on opposite ends of the treetop network, the tribe organized their first retaliatory hunt. But it was not a raid. It was a test of silence, of shadow. Each warrior was trained to hang motionless from branches for hours, breathing through reed straws. They learned to strike with slings that made no sound, to kill without shouts, to vanish without rustle. They wove cloaks of owl feathers and coated their skin in bat guano to hide their scent. They became the forest's invisible ghosts. The first mission was not to kill. It was to follow. A single bridge sentinel was stationed as bait, visibly alone, exposed on a moonless night. Above him, 10 Sky Killers waited in absolute stillness, hidden in the canopy. Hours passed. Then, a flicker. Not wings. Not footsteps. A slither, like wind sliding through leaves without moving them. And then, the shape. Tall, too tall. No glow to its eyes. It did not walk, but hung, descending silently upside down from the branches above the bait, as if it belonged there. A long, hook-shaped weapon clutched in one hand. Bone rings around its neck. Skin tight and black, but patterned like leaves, camouflage. Not spirit. Not a beast. A man, or something very close to one. The bait never screamed. The Sky Killers dropped. 5 died. 2 were taken. But the creature bled. It bled. And in the forest, that meant only one thing. It could die. The blood was dark, almost black, thick like sap. It dripped from the leaves where the thing had leapt, and wherever it fell, insects died. One of the elders, a woman called Inatel, burned the sap with sacred wood and said it smelled of salt water and rot. Not like a man's wound, but like something that had never walked the earth clean. Still, the Sky Killers rejoiced. Their enemy was mortal. The forest had shifted again. But the celebration was brief. Aiken, wounded in the arm, whispered during fevered sleep of what he'd seen. Not just the creature's face, but the symbols carved into its bone mask. They matched none known to Canopy, but Tella recognized something from a forbidden place, the dead nest. Long ago, deep in the northeastern canopy, a tribe had vanished. They were called the Nharu, and their story was buried, not by time, but by fear. It was said they tried to fly, not with wings or prayers, but with stolen gods. They had built spirals of bone in the treetops, fed them blood, and vanished into the night skies. No one dared speak of them, but the symbols carved into the masks were the same. Tella insisted on a reconnaissance mission to the old Nhara territory. The elders forbade it, so she left without their blessing, taking 5 shadow-trained warriors. What they found changed everything. The dead nest was not ruins, it was alive. Dozens of structures, woven from bone and vine, formed towers that reached above the canopy. Bridges stretched not across trees, but through them, like roots in the air. Strange drums echoed in the dusk, but no fires were lit. The air was thick with scent, not decay, but preservation. As if the jungle itself refused to reclaim the place. It was not abandoned. I watched it. In the center of the highest tower, the Sky Killers discovered a relic, a great black disc carved from volcanic stone, embedded into the bark of a living ceiba tree. Around its edge, tiny bone tokens were tied in spirals, teeth, fingers, claws. The tree's leaves had turned black around it. When Tella touched the disc, it hummed, not with sound, but with memory. Visions burned behind her eyes, cities with no ground, men who wore birds like armor, fires falling from the sky. She fell back, vomiting blood. The others pulled her away. That night, one of the warriors slit his own throat without a word. His last gesture pointed to the stars. They returned to Caranael shaken. The Sky Killers had not been born to fight spirits or rival tribes. They were now at war with something older, something that had waited. Inatel declared it plainly. "We have not discovered them," she said. "They have released us." The Sky Killers sharpened their spears. But now, they weren't preparing for defense. They were preparing for infiltration. Tella said there was a nest within the nest, a secret chamber beneath the black disk. Whatever waited, there was the answer, or the end. And so the plan was made. Descend into the forgotten roots of the canopy. Not to fight, to understand. Because the true night was coming, and it would not care who called themselves hunter. There are places in the forest where even light does not linger. Where roots twist not in hunger, but in warning. Where time feels heavy. The Sky Killers descended into such a place, beneath the black disk of the dead nest. They had returned with only 3 warriors, including Tella, and 2 tree wives trained in the old rites of silence and spiritual binding. One bore the ash mirror, a disk of polished resin and charred bark said to reveal the truth beneath illusions. The other carried harabone, a flute carved from the thigh of a slain elder, used only when calling something meant to remain hidden. They waited for dusk. Then, in absolute silence, they entered the hollow tree beneath the disk. Inside, it was not dark, it glowed. Faint green light pulsed from patterns carved into the wood, as if the tree had been taught to breathe differently. The descent was slow, a spiral deeper than any root chamber known to the tribe. Along the walls, carvings, human figures with wings not of feathers but bone, faces hidden behind masks. Some held spears, others, the sky itself. At the bottom, they found the nest, a circular chamber, wrapped in the tree's own roots, opened like a womb. In the center was a corpse, or something that had once been alive. It was neither preserved nor rotting. Its skin was bark-like, pale, stretched over a frame far too long for a man. Fingers with 6 joints. Teeth not for chewing, but grinding. The mask was different, not carved from bone, but grown, as if it had formed from the face. But it was not alone. Arranged in a perfect spiral around the central figure were dozens of human skulls. Some were etched with symbols, others fused with stone or metal. Each was bound with a vine that pulsed, as if still alive. One of the tree wives placed the ash mirror on the ground. What they saw was not a reflection. They saw the sky, not above, but beneath them. Stars twisted and bent, moving in unnatural ways. And rising from that sky, into the mirror, into the roots, them. Not beasts, not spirits, not gods. A people who had ascended into the canopy and never returned. Not because they died, because they had changed, because they chose something else. The figure at the center had once been an Haru elder, Tella spoke his name aloud, Sunra. Her voice echoed, and for the briefest moment, his eyelids twitched. The dead, she realized, were not dead here. They were dreaming. One of the vines moved. Panic surged, but Tella held the others back. She approached Sunra and whispered, "Why?" No voice came, but her mind burned with images, the tribe offering children to the treetops, not in sacrifice, in hope. The desire to rise above storms, beyond hunger, to never need to descend, to live in the sky, untouched by time. They had succeeded, but something followed them up, something that hated the light. It had mimicked them, learned their ways, and now it wanted the rest of the forest. The sky killers were not being hunted because they were enemies. They were being watched because they were next. Tella knew then. The forest war was not a fight over trees or territory. It was a choice: remain bound to the earth or accept the price of freedom above. But even freedom can rot. They left the chamber in silence. Sun Ra did not stir again. The vines withdrew. Back in Caranael, Tella said only this: they are not gods. They are not demons. They are our future, if we forget to fear the sky. The council gathered in the throat tree, a living chamber at the heart of Caranael, where even whispers echoed like thunder. 13 elders, each wearing the tattoos of their bloodlines, sat in a circle carved by time and tradition. Tella stood before them with the silence of one who had seen something too old to explain. When she finished recounting what lay beneath the dead nest, no one spoke. Not at first. Then the old fire spoke. Daka, the only elder who remembered the migration times, when their people left the stone valleys for the sky. His voice was brittle bark. We built high to escape the claws of earth. But we never asked what lived above. Another asked the question everyone feared. What if the sky killers are not the enemy? What if they are us, waiting to happen again? That night, Caranael broke its oldest law. It summoned the Driftborn. The Driftborn were skywalkers who lived on the outer edges of the forest web, where the trees thinned and the mists never lifted. They were part myth, part reality, gliders, dream divers, and wind choosers who never returned the same from their journeys. No council had called them in 3 generations. But they came, and they brought with them the bone kite, a structure built from the rib cages of 6 birds and the stretched hide of a skyworm, long extinct. They called it a message, but it was a warning. The bone kite had writing etched into it, not of Caranael, but of the first tongue. Tella and 2 lore weavers translated it slowly, line by line. We climbed to flee the flood, but the sky was not empty. We built towers. They built silence. We forgot our names. They remembered. It was not a prophecy. It was a confession. The sky killers were not foreign invaders. They were Caranael's reflection, an echo of ambition, a glimpse of what happens when survival becomes detachment, when people forget the cost of height. Tella understood. The threat could not be fought with spears, nor could it be ignored. It had to be faced, with memory intact and fear acknowledged. So she proposed something mad. A descent into the lower green, the forest floor, a place their kind had not walked in 100 years. The idea split the council like lightning. To descend was to die, they said. The roots held more terrors than the treetops. But Tella insisted. If the sky has turned against us, then the answer lies beneath it. A few agreed. Others spat curses. But the winds were shifting. The forest was choosing its next breath. 3 days later, Tella and a small band, warriors, tree wives, a driftborn wind listener, and a silent child with golden eyes, prepared for descent. They tied their farewell vines, whispered to the Canopy gods, placed beads into the mouths of their parents for luck. Then they vanished below the light. The branches creaked, the mist closed, and the war between what was above and what was forgotten below began to stir. The descent into the lower green was not a journey. It was a shedding. For generations, the people of Caranael had lived above the ground, walking only on woven branches, speaking only to the wind. Now, Tella and her chosen few entered a world that had not heard human breath in decades. The air was thicker here, sweet with rot, alive with eyes that did not blink. The roots were massive, not just supports for the sky, but entire kingdoms of fungi, moss, and things without names. Every step had to be earned, every sound swallowed. The group moved with silence, listening for signs of the sky killers. But the true danger was not above them. It was below. By the second night, one of the warriors, a quiet man named Elon, had vanished. No scream, no struggle, just a circle of flattened moss and a faint chittering sound, like bone tapping against bark. The others did not speak his name again. That was the rule of the lower green. On the fourth night, the child with golden eyes, who had spoken no word since they left, suddenly pointed toward a hollowed tree. Inside, carved deep into the bark, was a glyph. Not one of the sky killers, but older. It matched a forgotten mark from the Naharu archives, the severed branch, an omen of exile. It was how traitors were once branded before being thrown from the canopy. Tella's blood went cold. Had the Naharu not disappeared, but been banished? That night, they found the remains of a camp, half-consumed bone tools, vines tied in ancient patterns. A fire pit is still charred. Someone had lived here not long ago, and they had known Caranael. The exile theory was no longer a myth. The sky killers may not be descendants of forgotten tribes, they might be them, twisted by years of abandonment, forced to survive in the roots where light did not reach. Revenge disguised as rebirth. But the worst came at dawn. A scream shattered the green stillness. Not human, not a beast, something in between. The trees trembled. From the mist stepped a figure, tall, sinewy, painted with mud and blood, draped in feathers and bones. Its face was hidden behind a cracked wooden mask. It held something in its hand. A skyhook, a weapon used by Caranael scouts, long believed extinct. Except this one had been remade, sharpened with obsidian, its handle wrapped in old ceremony cloth. The message was clear. The sky killers were not invaders. They were returning. They had been watching, waiting, learning, and now they were rising, not to destroy Caranael, but to replace it. Tella stood her ground. She lowered her weapon. Why? She asked. The masked figure tilted its head. Then it whispered, "We remember what you forgot." Then it vanished into the roots, leaving behind only silence and a smear of red on the bark. Tella climbed back into the light with bark-scarred hands and the ache of something irreversible in her chest. Of the 7 who had descended, only 3 returned. The others were taken, by claws, by silence, or by choice. She said nothing as she emerged into Caranael, but her silence spoke louder than a death drum. The council was waiting. The skywalkers, the flame tenders, the vine priests, all gathered in the ring of canes, the high platform where judgments were made and legends were born. Tella stepped into the center. Her clothes were torn, her face streaked with the soot of fireless nights. Her eyes that had seen what waited beneath, locked with those of the elders. And she spoke. They are not monsters. They are not beasts. They are our memories, twisted by exile. The sky killers are our shadow, the other path we once took. Gasps broke across the ring. She dropped the weapon she had taken, the obsidian-wrapped skyhook, onto the woven floor. The elders recoiled, as if it carried poison. But the younger warriors leaned in. They saw something else, a reflection of themselves, inverted by time and suffering. Then she shared the unthinkable, the mask. It had symbols, not of foreign origin, but from the ancestor veins, an ancient ceremonial script only used in the earliest days of the High Forest. It meant, return through fire. That was no battle cry. That was right. A claim. The sky killers had not just survived. They believed they were entitled to ascend again, to take back what was once theirs. Their raids were not just warfare. They were reclamation. And Caranael's silence had fueled it. For too long, the Canopy dwellers had spoken of the lower green as death. But it was not death that had waited. It was a memory. Tella then said something no one expected. We do not need war. We need witnessing. We need to remember what exile made of them, and what forgetting made of us. The council erupted. Some roared in rage. Others begged for blades. A few called for fire to purge the roots entirely. But the sky itself answered. A flaming arrow streaked across the canopy. Then another, and another. From the northeast edge, near the Nightvine Watch, fires rose like red flowers. The Sky Killers had already begun. Karen L. would not choose between peace or war. That choice had been taken. But Tella did not run. She stood in the rising wind, the scent of smoke in her hair. "This is not the end," she whispered. "This is the return." And far below, among the roots, the drums of the forgotten began to beat. The canopy burned red. Karen, the city of branches and breath, swayed under the weight of its oldest nightmare. Fire danced across the upper walkways like angry spirits. Children were lifted into safety nests while warriors armed themselves with woven shields and flint bows. The forest, once an extension of their souls, had become their cage. The Sky Killers had come, but not like ghosts. They came in formation. Climbing vines they once used for exile now turned into ladders of vengeance. They moved without speaking, without breaking leaves, like hunters born from the bark itself. They carried bone javelins, obsidian hooks, and slings made from the sinews of canopy beasts. But more terrifying than their weapons was their coordination. This was no raid. It was an uprising. Tella moved swiftly through the panic. The council's orders had been contradictory. Defend the west flank. No, pull back to the ash bridge. Set fire to the climbing roots. But she ignored them all. She had her own mission. The child with golden eyes, who had seen the glyph in the roots, had vanished again. Some said the child was never real. Others whispered that the child was a spirit, a watcher, a whisper of the ancestors. But Tella knew better. The child had come from them, from the Sky Killers. If she could find the child, she might find a way to stop the siege. She ducked under a collapsing walkway and crossed over the vine bridge, now half engulfed in flame. Below, she could see the Sky Killers climbing. Dozens of them, masked, limber, moving like the forest welcomed them back. They weren't attacking Karen Al. They were reclaiming it. When she reached the old sap sanctuary, she found the child, standing at the edge, overlooking the chaos. Not afraid, not weeping, waiting. "Tella," the child said, without turning. That name, spoken in that voice, stopped her blood. "How do you know?" The child looked up. "Because you were once one of us." Memory flooded her. Painful, fragmented, a long-forgotten exile when she was barely old enough to remember. Her mother's face, a carved mask, whispers in the dark. She had not been born in Karen Al. She had been saved from the lower green. She fell to her knees. "Why me?" The child looked at the flames. "Because you were the only one they did not break." A horn sounded in the distance. A call to retreat. Karen Al's defenses were collapsing. And in that moment, Tella realized this war could not be won, only ended. But to end it, she would need to choose a side, not between Karen Al and the Sky Killers, but between forgetting and remembering. The child held out something, a carved wooden mask, cracked but clean, ancient symbols etched along the edges. "Put it on," the child whispered. "Become what they fear." Tella stared at it. She had returned to the canopy as a scout. Now, she would rise as a bridge. Not a warrior, not a traitor, but the one who remembered both songs. She put on the mask, not to hide, but to reveal. The moment the carved wood touched her skin, the memories sharpened like flint, the songs sung in the exile camps, the lullabies of the lower green, the sound of nightroot drums echoing through mist and misery. Tella stood not as a warrior of Karen Al, but as one born of both worlds. From the treetop rise, she leapt, down into the flame-lit battlefield, where chaos raged between boughs and bark, where defenders in feathered helms clashed with the dark-painted Sky Killers. Some saw her and paused, unsure whether to strike or kneel. She did not wait for their choice. She moved through the fray with smoke curling around her, her presence cutting a path not with violence, but with memory. She shouted in the tongue of the exile tribes, words that hadn't been spoken aloud above the roots in generations. "You are not forgotten. You are not shadows. You are the sons and daughters of the first climb." The effect was thunderous. The front lines of the Sky Killers faltered. Some lowered their weapons. Others cried out in confusion. Their war masks had hidden their pain, but her voice made it real again. From Karanal's high spire, Elder Somtak watched in stunned silence. "She's leading them," he whispered. "Not against us. Through us." The elder priestess beside him trembled. "The blood memory, she's calling it awake." The tide of battle slowed. Not stopped. Not won. But shifted. Until now, every Sky Killer had believed they fought alone. Exiles, avengers, orphans of betrayal. But seeing Tella, one of them standing amid the canopy, speaking their truth aloud, it shattered their isolation. And then, the impossible happened. From within the Sky Killer's ranks, a figure stepped forward, taller than the rest, his mask split with jaguar fangs, his arms inked in root blood symbols. The Wounded One, the lost war chief of the exiles. He looked at Tella, tilted his head. "Your voice is not fire," he growled, "but your heart burns." Tella removed the mask, then let it burn through both sides. The Wounded One raised his spear. For a moment, it seemed he might strike. But instead, he drove the blade into the bark at her feet, a ritual of surrender or perhaps recognition. "End it," he said, "before the forest burns us all." The canopy went quiet. No cries, no arrows, no footfalls, only the creak of trees and the crackle of dying flames. And from that silence, Tella spoke. "The war is over, not by blood, but in return." Some wept, some collapsed, some, especially the old ones, simply turned their faces skyward, unsure whether they were still dreaming. Tella stood alone in the center of a broken battlefield, but her voice had become the bridge. The Sky Killers had not been defeated. They had been heard. Dawn broke through the canopy like an apology. No drums, no war horns, no chants, just birdsong, tentative and trembling, as if even the trees were unsure peace could survive daylight. Tella stood atop the high platform, where once executions had been held, where exiles were declared, where names were stricken from memory. Now, for the first time in living memory, the forgotten were returning, not in chains or flames, but in voice. Below her, the warriors of Karael and the Sky Killers stood side by side. Not comrades, not yet, but no longer enemies. They bore wounds, both visible and not. Some still refused to meet the other's eyes. But they stood. The forest, for once, listened. Tella raised the blackened skyhook in one hand, not as a weapon, but as a symbol. Beside her, the Wounded One stood silent, his mask in his hands, not on his face. She addressed both tribes. "This is not peace. Not yet. This is witnessing. This is the act of remembering the pain we caused and the pain we buried." She unrolled a long vine parchment. It bore names, names once erased by the canopy dwellers when the exiles were cast out. One by one, she began to read them aloud. As she spoke, a hush fell over the crowd. Even the leaves seemed to pause. These were the names of the vanished, the slain, the accused, the betrayed, those whose lives had been traded for silence. Each name was met with a drumbeat, not from Karanal, but from the Sky Killers. One for each soul lost to exile, to vengeance, to forgetting. Elder Somtak approached slowly. His old bones trembled, but not from weakness, from the truth. He removed his crown of feathers and placed it at Tella's feet. "Let new roots grow," he said, "but never again without memory." By midday, the forest floor had become sacred. The platform was transformed into a circle of names, vines woven into the sigils of both clans, Sky Colors and root blood entwined in a spiral of remembrance. Together, they dug the ash grove, a garden planted where the fiercest fighting had been. No bodies buried, no markers, just saplings growing from the ash of war. Children from both tribes, eyes wide, unaware of how close they came to inheriting only fire, ran among the trees, laughing for the first time in days. Peace had not arrived like a storm. It had arrived like a wound beginning to scar. Years passed. The blood vines that once marked the borders between Karanal and the Sky Killers' exile zones were gone, replaced by hanging gardens and bridges woven from living roots. A fragile unity had grown, not from treaties or weapons, but from stories. Tella had never sought power, but the forest chose her, not as queen, not as a priestess, but as something older, the living memory. She wandered, never settling long in one place. Sometimes in Carinael's great halls, sometimes in the exile clearings that were now being called hearth roots. Wherever she went, she carried two things: the carved mask of her mother's line and the skyhook that had once been lifted in rage. Both now symbols, both now relics of survival. The wounded one had vanished again, but this time by choice. Some claimed he went west, following the sun into the stone mists. Others whispered that he had returned to the deep roots, to guard the last memories of the war in silence. Tella never searched for him. She knew he had done what warriors must do when the battle is over: disappear. A new generation was rising. Children who climbed freely through the canopy without needing to ask which clan owned which branch. They wore colors from both heritages, danced in circles that merged sky and earth. But even peace has guardians. The Ash Grove, once a battlefield, had become a place of pilgrimage. Each year, on the night of the Sky Killers, the anniversary of the war's climax, the people gathered beneath the moonlit trees. They lit no fires. They spoke no words. Instead, they listened to the creak of wood, to the wind through the canopy, to the forest remembering. And then, slowly, one by one, they began to speak the names again. All of them, even the ones that once made their parents weep. Tella would stand at the center of the grove, mask in hand, head bowed. And when she raised the mask above her, the children would know, this is not a costume. This is a warning. That forgetting leads to blood. That silence becomes exile. That every branch broken in secret becomes a war shouted in fire. In her final years, when her hair had turned to bark-colored gray, Tella was asked by a young student, "Why did you not kill them all when you had the chance? Why spare the ones who burned your home?" She looked up from her woven mat, smiled. "Because they didn't burn my home. They burned theirs. They just didn't know it at the time." And so the story was kept, not on stone, not on walls, but in the living, breathing world of the canopy, where vines carried memories like veins, where roots whispered in the dark, where death once reigned from above, and from that death, a new sky was born. Not a sky of vengeance, but a sky of return.